Sampling guitar is not as easy as you might think it is. I know what you're thinking, it can't be too hard. Just stick a microphone in front of the guitar or the amp, capture some strumming, some notes, and throw it into a sampler, right? But not quite. Unlike pianos or synths or other instruments, there are a few other considerations that we need to have when sampling guitars. And I'm going to walk you through some of those today, while also exploring some guitar libraries that have had to meet these challenges. We're going to be checking out the brand new library Lost Guitar by Westwood Instruments, as well as some other libraries from Ample Sounds and Native Instruments. So let's get stuck in and find out what the big deal is. Hey, my name is Steve and welcome back to Command Shift New. If you've ever seen any of my other software reviews that have had guitars in them, you know that I have some gripes often with them and I'm not entirely convinced by their realism. That's because it can be quite tricky to actually sample them accurately. And that kind of leaves it sounding a little bit unrealistic. Every instrument actually has its own little characteristics and idiosyncrasies that we need to be aware of when sampling it. Some are easier than others. Synths, for example, can be quite easy because they're often sampling a very simple sound that's either been electronically or digitally created, and they often don't have things like different velocity layers to be concerned with. Pianos, on the other hand, being an acoustic instrument, they do have a few more details to consider. Things like velocity and dynamics. The sound when the keys are let go actually creates its own sound with the hammers coming to a rest on the strings. There's also pedals on the floor, and when you hold down a sustain pedal and play a note, there's a little bit of crosstalk between the different sounds of the other keys and strings as well. But both of these instruments can play polyphonically quite a lot of the time with very few limitations, and they are quite easy to get a sound out of because they're percussive in nature. You just press the key and voila, there is a sound. Other instruments aren't quite as straightforward as that, and the guitar is one of those that has a lot of different and interesting intricacies and limitations. It can play polyphonically, but you've only got 6 strings to play with. And if you want to play 2 notes at the same time that are, say, a minor second apart, you're going to have some very stretched out fingers in order to make that happen. So chords tend to be played in a very spaced out way. And if one note is played and then a second one is played on top of that note, then quite often the first one just stops playing because if it's on the same string, you can only play one note on that string at the same time. And the guitar has little squeaks and sounds and string noise as you stop notes as well. So let's look at some of these issues and how some libraries have worked around them. First of all, let's take a look at this strumming pattern. When strumming, there are obviously a lot of dead notes that are played or scratch notes between chords that are rhythmic in nature that give the vibe and flow of everything, as well as the fact that we're changing directions when we're strumming. We're going down, then up, so we're playing some on the down, some on the up. There's also little squeaks and noises as we move our fingers up and down. It's very hard to program something like this and make it sound really, really realistic with just a software instrument. Playing a bunch of single notes that have been sampled together is not necessarily going to sound like a strum, even if you try and roll it up or roll it down, because there is a little bit of a difference in the volume between the pick sound when strumming a chord versus when plucking a single note. So it'll just sound a little bit off. Also, the guitarist will often lift their fretting fingers just a little bit to deaden the note after every chord, to give a little bit of space between that chord and the next chord, or to create the dead notes that we can hear the scratches in between. So we'd have to make sure that we're programming that along with the up and down direction, not to mention the scratching noises themselves as well. And when you consider all of that you'd have to do in order to program a strumming pattern, you might be well justified to think it's easier if I just pick up a guitar and play it myself, or get a guitarist to pick up a guitar and play it for me. So some libraries just straight up do that. Strummed Acoustic by Native Instruments, for example, is a library that does just that. It has pre-recorded loops and different patterns that have different strumming patterns that you can change between with key switches, and you can obviously change the chord that you're playing by playing a different note. And it even has end of phrase notes at the bottom there in these sort of yellowy green color keys, which basically means that you can end any strumming pattern at any time with a nice sort of strum out or a, palm mute of the strings or something. Check it out. When it comes to playing solo notes though, it actually is really important to capture how you let go of the note. There are scratching and string noise sounds that happen when you let go of that note, but also the right hand coming down often to mute the strings has its own sound too. Native Instruments' Electric Mint Guitar Library is actually one of these libraries that puts that sound in, and we utilize something called release triggers for that. You usually hear release triggers on a piano, and as I've mentioned before in this video, when you let go of the keys, the hammers actually come and rest on the strings, and that actually creates a sound. It's not a musical sound per se, but it's a sound of the instrument that we would hear if it was played acoustically. However, we use release triggers to do the same thing for a guitar library. We capture the sound of someone's hand muting the strings, or someone's finger sliding off that note or moving away from that note, and we capture those and use those as release triggers. Check out, for example, some notes on this instrument, and I'll play it with effects and without effects so you can kind of hear the detail and see how it affects the realism of the sound. Another library that I think also does this release trigger thing quite well is the semi-hollow body guitar by Ample Sound. It sometimes feels a little bit too loud, and I'm sure there's a way to control the volume of them, but you know, here it is. And this library actually highlights another important consideration, and that's chord voicing. Check out this chord on the guitar, for example. The chord is played in a very particular way, in a particular position. You can't just play piano-style chords and expect the guitar to sound realistic. When you play that piano-style chord, it's often on the wrong position and it doesn't actually play correctly. So you actually need to space it out so that you use only 6 notes, no more, and that each note can be played on a different string in a comfortable position that a real player could actually play. And the Ample Sounds library is really good for this because you can actually see the fretboard and see where the notes are being placed. You're not just looking at a keyboard below, you're actually looking at where these notes are positioned on the fretboard. So you can visually make sure that it's lining up correctly. Take a look at this, the difference between like a bad piano voice chord and a guitar chord. And this library is great because it also accounts for hammer-ons and pull-offs as well. Check out this sort of Hendrix-style lick. If you play this style of lick in the Ample Sounds library, you will actually see the hammer-ons and hammer-offs working, where it mutes the first note in favor of the second note as you hammer on and then plays the other note as you pull it off again. You can actually see a little triangle kind of pointing in the direction of where the note is moving to, indicating that because it's all on one string, it automatically mutes that one and plays the new one. It's honestly so much to consider when you pull all of these things together as to how do you create a real accurate sounding guitar library. You can see that most of these focus on a particular style of playing, and they choose a sampling method that actually reflects that style or best suits that style. But that means that they each have their own, strengths and weaknesses. But it doesn't have to be all about creating the perfect guitar library. It can actually be about the character of the sound and how that pushes you into new territory. I spoke about this in a recent video about the debate of which is more important, accuracy or character, and I'll leave a link to that video above and below if you want to check that out. But sometimes though, it's actually more important to have the character and expression of a sound that could be based on the guitar, but pushes you into a new direction. It's wanting the sound of a guitar, but to explore what else it can really do. After all, sampling allows you to recreate something perfectly, but also allows you to manipulate it further. And by going experimental, you no longer really have to account for things like hammer-ons and pull-offs, for things like strumming patterns, for things like the string noise as you remove a finger or mute the strings. It's about taking the library in a new direction, exploring the guitar, but not limited by its own limitations. That's what I think makes Lost Guitar such a cool library, and I want to thank Westwood Instruments for sending it my way to check out. As a guitarist, I appreciate that it is inspired by guitar, but it pushes the guitar far more than I probably naturally would have done myself on my own guitar. It doesn't try to just be a guitar or a perfect guitar, it's actually its own instrument. And I want to show you some of the cool patches that it has. It's just landed and is available now, so I'll leave a link to it below along with the other libraries that I've showcased in this video if you want to check them out yourself. So there are just 4 libraries that take very different approaches on how to sample a guitar to work around its limitations or completely avoid them. They each have their own unique voice, their own unique take, and therefore their own character. Whether it's recreating the perfect guitar sound or pushing the guitar beyond its limits, I really always look forward to seeing what people do with guitar sounds. And I can't wait to see what's next. It'll be interesting to see what other libraries come up. If you've enjoyed this video, why not consider subscribing? We do often check out a lot of new instruments as well as chat about some of their limitations, musical theory stuff, sampling our own instruments and all kinds of things on this channel. So if you dig it, you can dive into all of our videos on our channel and check out what we've done in the past and subscribe for more in the future. But otherwise, I will catch you in the next one.